Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Griffin. I'm from the University of Pittsburgh. I've been there for about 3 years, and prior to that, I was at the National Science Foundation in Washington for something over 30 years, and had the good fortune of being able to fund Stefan, among other people, and Lee Giles, who'll be here a little bit later. And I wanted to talk this morning about some new models of scholarly communication for digital scholarship. And to begin with, just a very brief definition. I'll refer to digital scholarship as encompassing new modes of inquiry that are based on very computation and data-intensive work. And for some examples, and you may be aware of some of this work. For example, this should start because it is a video. This is an 11th century manuscript of the Iliad, the one on which modern versions are based. And you see that what they're doing is they're trying to digitize it. It's the first time in 100 years that the book has actually been opened. And you can see the number of steps that it takes to flatten the pages. But what they're really interested in are the marginalia or the scholia of the work. And so for that, they need to do some multispectral illumination. And under ultraviolet light, the work comes clear. Similarly, this is a work that also involves a document recognition. If I can get it to operate properly. I'm having a little trouble with this video. Come on. In any event, that's a scroll taken from Herculaneum, and it was instantly flash carbonized when the volcano erupted in 79 AD. And what they're trying to do is unwrap this and read it. And that uses a variety of techniques, including computed tomography, X-ray computed tomography, and then some very elaborate computer vision algorithms. Here's another example that you frequently see of virtual, and once again, I seem to be having trouble linking to my videos, but a virtualization of Rome at 400 AD, which shows in fairly exacting details what Rome actually looked like in 400 AD. And here is a feature-based recognition of Cyprus, icons which show the cultural periods of Cyprus. And quite a few more. Here is a reconstruction of pots from Petra. The computer laser scan, well, they're laser scans, and then puts the pots back together with some very sophisticated algorithms. Up here is a Buddhist canon, 11,000 pages from the 11th century, 52 million glyphs. Where they're walking through the pages in an immersive environment at the University of Hong Kong. And here is one very close-up detail of Michelangelo's David, rendered in 2 billion polygons by the graphics group at Stanford. Now, many of these projects were done at some time ago, but have yet but I considered pioneering efforts in that they provided real proof of concepts that this sort of thing could be done. And the last one, and again, another video, shows the sea ice degradation across a year. And what the video shows, and if I can get it to work at some point, is that the ice separating Canada from the Northern Territories completely disappears for some period of time. for the first time in recorded history. So, we talk about digital scholarship as being a new form of inquiry, and I'm going to include within it e-science or data science, data-driven research, and data-intensive research and scholarship. Made possible by exponential increases in all the componentry, portable devices, high bandwidth wireless, collaborative environments, open access, open source for sure, and then all the things that derive from people's contributions and works in making available for at no charge some highly sophisticated analytical and organizational data management tools. I've been teaching for the past couple of years a course on digital scholarship at the PhD seminar at the University of Pittsburgh. And it's been really an amazing experience for me in that it's not so much I teach the course as the students teach me. And the way that it works is that each week I introduce a set of topics and ask them to select something that appeals to them, that they might feel some passion about, and develop it and create an effective ways of communicating what they've developed during at the next week's meeting. And it's very interesting. The presentations have been just dazzling and have explored areas of the web and types of tools and topics that we've heard about in some detail today. And so I have a collection now of over 200 presentations done with Prezis, with PowerPoints, with videos of themselves working in different sessions. And what has been most kind of heartening to me is that they come into the classroom and I think kind of sit down and feeling like isolated individuals in a class. And when I say, well, you know, just pick a topic, pick something that you like. This is the first time in maybe 18 years of education that someone has not assigned them a piece of work to do. So I'm really asking them to be a scholar, to explore something. And what the second thing that's remarkable is that when they present their project, many of them are extremely shy at the beginning, but their classmates are incredibly nurturing and supportive. So that over the period of the term, in 12 or 15 sessions, what we have is a classroom environment kind of evolving from one of individuals who are feeling somewhat alone in pursuing their work to this sort of cohesive, collaborative group of people who are exploring new problems and, importantly, reconsidering how they think about material. So they can ask themselves comfortably, how am I thinking about this? Can I think about this in another way? So these are all parts of the creative nature of digital scholarship that one wouldn't normally expect to arise in the study of analog materials. So in any event, we'll think about digital scholarship as new research and study approaches, computational research, computational science, data-driven research, data-intensive research, which I kind of gravitate towards myself because of the diversity of information objects. But in many respects, these are just different forms or extensions of theoretical, analytical modes of inquiry and experimental or observational modes. So the consequences of the digital era, which I think a lot of people believes that starting in 2002, when the amount of data produced exceeded the amount of digital storage space being created. So we have a number of developments, and during that time between the analog and the digital ages, we were all part of this tumultuous experience of new ideas flashing like a strobe light and then disappearing, and new technologies flashing again as being the end and the solution to everything, and then disappearing. So we've had to kind of keep a balance and a very open mind and slide with things. And so the historic context is just one of technological change, where there were rather extraordinarily exponential increases in all things, all componentry associated with computation. And also a decrease in cost. But I think probably most significantly, what a lot of people overlook is an exponential decrease in size, the size of a device. If one were to try to make an iPhone or a smartphone in 1993, well, one couldn't because of all the apps and so forth and so on. But to get the basic computational and data management functions into the machine, the cost would be roughly $4 million, and you would need a pickup truck to haul it with you. So it's this decrease in size which has really made for a widespread use. There's also been the cultural change. There has been this kind of groundswell of generosity, of intellectual philanthropy, if you will, that did not occur in the analog age. Some early programs at NSF, which sort of I think were fairly important in helping us move from the analog to the digital era, were the Supercomputer Centers program, in which more or less grounded computational science. The NSFnet, which helped to spread establish a network of networks, and critically important, adopted TCP/IP as a protocol. The Digital Libraries Initiative, which I think reflected fairly in a clear way an interregnum during these two periods, by demonstrating that digital content could offer new means of learning and new means of extending knowledge across wide distances and collaborative possibilities and so forth and so on. And then the cyber infrastructure program, which is ongoing today. So we had a change in perspectives from the 1990s, where the focus was really fairly much, early 1990s, was on the grand challenge requirements, the term which is introduced in 1987 by Wilson. I'm sorry, I forgot his first name, but it was focused on computational simulations, which computational science, but digital content was really not part of the thinking, nor were global data research infrastructures. So that all came a bit later, and that was not necessarily driven by funding bodies. That was driven more by a pull from the community. So I'm going to speak a little bit here about digital repositories, but I want to reflect back that Clifford Lynch and Hector Garcia Molina anticipated much of what I'm going to show you in a 1995 report called Interoperability, Scaling, and the Digital Libraries Research Agenda. And that's a very interesting report to read, just as kind of a check. So, we're going to talk about interoperability broadly defined. There's all sorts of interoperability. Basically, for repository interoperability, one wants to get to a level of functionality that databases have. So in other words, you can pose a fairly complex query to a large group of repositories, and that you will see these repositories as a single unified resource. And the query that you pose may have some semantic dimensions to it. And you will receive a clear answer, well, a clear result, and have the option of presenting those results in different forms. Now, this varies really dramatically from a search engine, even from a page-ranked search engine. And we don't yet have a significant number of repositories that are operating at this very high level, although the semantic web and linked open data initiatives are leaning that way. But what it means is that if to develop repositories that support these sorts of functionalities simultaneously shifts responsibilities over to the users to understand the structure of the data within the repositories. So interoperability can also be viewed in terms of abstraction levels, but quickly the repository development trends have over time developed just from the basic ITC infrastructure of the supercomputer centers in the early 1990s through the digital libraries, where you had partially linked digital repositories with fairly simple metadata, into the institutional and disciplinary repositories that were federated according to more complex metadata and structural resource description frameworks. So that would include ePrints, DSpace, Fedora. And now we're getting the integrated, very large repository systems and global data infrastructures, such as the Research Data Alliance, so forth and so on. And this is interlinked data using the semantic web and linked open data. So the progress is being made, and the conclusion that can be drawn is that that we're reaching the point now where repository infrastructure can be the environment for scholarly communication, for formal scholarly communication. And so that while the application space has simultaneously grown with the development of more advanced repositories, it still favors the sciences in the United States. So that for the level of investment for scholarship in the humanities in the United States, even though the range of applications is very, very broad, the investment level to allow scholars to pursue them is very, very small. So what I'm going to show here are just some of the thoughts that came out of the scholarly communication meeting in Pittsburgh of January of last year. And we had a very nice group of attendees. I don't have the website. We do have a website with all the presentations of all the participants. But the meeting goals were to basically to look for the new means and opportunities for enhancing scholarly communications and new models. So there were a number of focuses that we asked the participants to consider. And goals were to find new methodologies, new frameworks, new document models, new means for dissemination, new measures to ensure accurate, appropriate attribution, acknowledgement, credit, and reward for those involved in carrying out the work. There is a persistent and recurring theme that I think was mentioned earlier by Tony, is defining features of science include repeatability and reproducibility. Now, many of the examples I showed in the matrix of digital scholarship projects involved extremely complex scholarly workflows with dozens of steps, with hundreds of data transitions and data types of artifacts, so that repeating the results or repeating an experiment and getting the same results means to do it in the same environment. And that's usually quite easy. But in order to reproduce the results, that means that someone is getting the information secondhand, and that they have to be able to repeat the information based on the information that they receive on whatever is published about the experiment. And as was mentioned by Tony in his earlier talk, often they can't. Either the information is insufficient, as well it might be. There's no way that a journal can conceivably communicate all the steps and intricacies of performing a digital work. And often they might prove to be wrong. It might be one thing to have a scientific experiment be wrong when the robot doesn't pick up the right ball. It's quite another thing to be wrong when you identify a new treatment for cancer. And so that's somewhat, in order to reproduce an experiment, you need to capture a full record of every step of the scholarly and the research workflow. And to do that is hard. And it is time consuming, and it is labor intensive. And the primary researchers won't be inclined to do this. They can't. It takes too much time. For them to move ahead in their work, they need to get that work published as quickly as possible and move ahead. So someone else has to take care of the burden of collecting and documenting the experiment. So what can be done to do that was one of the driving questions of our workshop. And what new types of expressive forms might make that task and those tasks easier, and also more accurately convey the meaning and the attributes of what one was doing. So, how do we make digital stewardship become a central part of a major research project in order to enable reproducibility of a research experiment is a very much an open question. One solution would be to fund a set of, would be to fund staff who would study the research project as it went along and collect all of the information. A meta-research activity that moves parallel with the research activity. Other suggestions have been using emulation methods and virtual machines to capture the flow of the information and of the scholarly workflow. So the recommendations were that to capture complete record and develop some models for scholarly output that allows for modularity. So to no longer think of a research publication as a single unit, but to think of it as modules. And that the publication could involve a staged release of those modules so that at any given time in the workflow, if the researchers were so inclined, they could publish the results of that workflow stage. And also, once the work were complete and it was expressed in terms of a dozen modules, that others could use them easily if it were in an open environment and recombine them so that it would be recombinant. So that we would not, the document would now be thought of as a modular expression and record of a work that could be recombined in order to facilitate reuse and enhance the overall impact. And so that was essentially what the recommendation number 2 in more detail considered. Now, just from the point of scholarly communication, and this is somewhat anecdotal since it is the Google Ngram, but we do notice that there's been somewhat of a significant rise in the use of the term beginning in about 1980. So people were starting to think about scholarly communication in richer terms beginning about 1980. And then as the open access debate hit its peak in the late 1990s, I suppose at that point also one could say it was the most controversial. And since then, it's drifting down, and it's not so controversial. I mean, it's something that is so obviously a need to increase the productivity of research.
Everybody keeps saying it's a done deal. I wish it was true.
It certainly is not a done deal in terms of institutional practices. And in the ways in which the academic culture arranges its affairs with its faculty, but certainly as an ideal, I believe.
So God knows that it's right.
So God and other beings, supreme beings, know that it's right, correct. And so the scholarly information is communicated in many ways, and to take those into account when in terms of rewarding scholars in universities is a good idea. So I've just put here some very simple models. This is probably the older model that probably ran out, that existed up until 15, 14 years ago. Very simple. You had the activity, the workflow stages. Then things got a bit more complicated. And today, well, we have some alternatives, and sometimes they, in terms of, some people will publish in their institutional repositories and will publish in open access in a variety of different ways. And there are some efforts to collect artifacts from each stage of the workflow. But I believe the new general model should include this, that there should be readily available in a web environment, a scholarly communications layer, if you will, where one can go to when they want without paying any fees and access research reports which are dynamic, which are changing, with detailed description of the methods and concepts, as well as to the software that led to them, to the data on which they're based, other experimental assets, provenance, citation linkings, and also there needs to be an awareness of the community adopted practices for presentation and other aspects related to preservation and data stewardship. Libraries, I think, have a big role in advancing this and making it happen. And this has not yet occurred. Libraries, I think, are kind of teetering on the edge. One problem is that libraries are still grappling with the journal subscription costs. A typical research library in a U.S. research institution may easily spend $3 million a year on print journal subscriptions. Large publishers, Elsevier, don't sell individual subscriptions. They sell bundles of journal descriptions. A bundle might be 2,200 different journals. And to buy this bundle, the problem is that some of the journals in that bundle will not be used once. And the cost for an individual journal, if one were to have that capability, might be somewhere over $10,000. So that essentially the cost of an article, of being able to read an article, might be the same as the cost of purchasing 30 or 40 monographs. So the libraries are in a budgetary crisis in the sense that they need to do something different, but they need to know how to do it in order not to raise the ire of some of their faculty. Nevertheless, if they take the step and are bold, they can do a great deal to accelerate the research cycle, expand the reach of the research, very importantly, inspire new forms of interoperable resources, create new environments for digital scholarship, and a lot are do that. Well, a few are doing that, and many more are planning to do that. And what that would mean would be that it would give scholars and researchers new intellectual freedoms to explore topics beyond the boundaries that are normally set by their academic departments, as well as to explore and use new tools to extend their studies in directions that would not otherwise be possible. So, one thing I think libraries might entertain is the idea of simply publishing journals. They may need to have some discussion about that in some of the larger library organizations. But libraries could quite easily be publishers, certainly of their own collections, but also journals too. So I have just my own little thoughts about what the libraries are in supporting data-intensive scholarship. That means that that's not data-driven research, and it's not e-science or data science. But for e-science simulation data, since the experiments can be run again, the libraries really need to have comprehensive links to the models and to the particular sites and all the information related to running the models. And when there's human involvement in the collection and formatting of experimental data, that's pretty important. But I think the most important task is for them to is to digitize and link their special and unique holdings. So most libraries have something that someone has given them that is either script or something else, form, or their journals. I know the Library of Congress, for example, has something like 20 feet of memoirs of Sigmund Freud, and his letters that he wrote to his group of people in Vienna. So there's also a need for new document models. I'll just go through these really quickly so we can get to the question. The challenges for the document models is to describe the complex projects. And as I said, you know, the document we might stop thinking of a document as a thing, but we might start thinking of a document as a set of components, of modules, each one of which can stand on its own, each one can change and be updated, and each one that can be recombined with modules from other documents in order to build yet a different document. Authorship might be undefined, but who cares? You could, you know, as long as there were documentation as to who did it, why they did it, and what was the substantive justification and validity, we would be okay on that. So there are some richer document models which partially allow that. And this is one example that Stefan Grodman put forward. There are new tools that can help. This is one that Carol Gobble uses at the University of Manchester, where the model itself allows some internal calculation and relieves some of the burden on the author. There's the notion of an executable paper, where one can get through a number of layers in order to see the, if you will, the innards of what makes up a document. And there are some dynamic project sites that one could consider as complex scholarly documents. This is a very nice, some very nice sites, the Electronic Cultural Atlas Initiative, constantly changing, constantly updating, combining geospatial information with temporal indexed information, with multilingual information, to produce a really deep reading of what a record of a particular historic event or period might be. And at MIT, there is another project. I mean, there are, of course, dozens, but this one focuses on some of the Japanese-Chinese conflicts in the early 20th century. And once again, there's a constant updating. People are adding to it. So the benefits of having richer documents might be, or at least one, is that the cultural heritage and cultural historical research can benefit enormously, because we no longer have to think of the past just in terms of the way that it's written in books, but we can come to an understanding of the past on our own terms. By going into these sites, we're kind of reading and understanding in different ways and different levels, and it's this set of alternatives for thinking about the historic record of us that makes us a scholar. That practice of examining possibilities for understanding, that's really in the heart of scholarship. And so often, and going back to my digital scholarship, people are used to being given an assignment, and they will go to a methodology which has been used time and time again, and they will crank out a result and say, now I understand this. Well, they do in one way, but only in one way. It may well be that this can be understood in a variety of ways, and once that happens, then it can be connected to something else, or to something else, or to something else. So it is this multitude of understandings which can lead to the multitude of collections, of connections, which kind of enrich our whole sense of what the world is and how it has come to be this way. So here's an example. And again, maybe it will work because I have this finger here. What I was going to show you here in this video is it's a NASA simulation of ocean currents. So the world turns and you see all the ocean currents swirling around, and it's done during the period 2012-2013. On the other hand, we have something what I think is much more significant. We have hundreds of years of ship's logs, where during which time the captain of the ship kept exact logs of things like wind and currents and places that they've been, places that they've seen, the stars, everything else. It is an incredibly rich record. And except for the most part, it is in script and cannot be machine readable. So in this case, and in many cases similar to this, we need to rely on things like crowdsourcing or online communities who are willing to do this work on behalf of all of us. And there are lots of projects where this is actually taking place. The BBC has their radio archives has been a very successful example of building an accurate corpus by asking people to help. Similarly, people who are very interested in certain types of species can have sites where they can record their observations. The bird watchers in the United States are an enormously passionate community, and they keep track of the number of birds and where they are seen, and they post them right away. And it is, you know, they know for sure that 2 billion birds a year are essentially killed because cities don't turn off their skyscraper lights, for God's sake, you know, at night. So the birds are flying around, they're getting totally disoriented because of the reflections and everything like that. And so I think that crowdsourcing and this kind of community organization can really be a very nice and very constructive way in which we can build up the content on the web. And I hope to see that. So very quickly, information visualization, which Hathi has really shown us some of the power of what that can do to help us advance our understanding. It's an essential part of digital scholarship. Had my videos, and I've been able to get those to work, I think you would have seen some examples of that. There are different types of videos, of visualization. This one, interestingly enough, came out of the Izmir conference, Music Information Retrieval Conference. Very pleased to say that the Digital Libraries Initiative, in a joint collaboration with the Joint Information Systems Committee, funded what I believe was the first music information retrieval project funded. And out of that came this series of conferences, the International Symposium on Music Information and Retrieval. And so just some highlights, a few activity type of infographics. This is also from the Daily Mail in the United Kingdom. Science map based on citing similarities. This is by Raffles, Porter, and Leydensdorf at Sussex, UK. I don't quite understand this. The Hathi Trust has this graphic on its site, which shows its work by Library of Congress classification call number. I'm not sure why that's there, but it is an interesting graphic. The measure project was very important, I think, because it demonstrated, I believe they used a 2 billion item set of citations to do the linking, and Johan Bolin at Indiana University did this work funded by the Mellon Foundation. Some interdisciplines emerge as a result of all these new developments. Culturenomics is fairly interesting. It focuses on linguistics and cultural phenomenon. And an interesting example of culturenomics. It shows the expression of emotion in 20th century books from 1900 to 2000. And it's the joy-sadness curve. Well, things were pretty sad during the war, obviously. Things were moderately happy during the 60s and 50s, although everyone was concerned that the US and Russia were going to blow up the world. Things got very happy toward the end of the 1990s when the internet was booming and the dot-com industries were going full steam. I think it's probably going to taper off a bit after 2000 for a while. But this is sort of fun. And there are some new interfaces for navigating collections. this is a DocuBurst interface and used to show journal articles by specialty. Finally, if you want a good place to look for metrics on open access, Heather Morrison keeps a good one. And here the web of data, a very familiar graphic, shows a link to Open Data Cloud, and if you go to the site and click on any of the collections, you will be able to see some very nice things. And finally, the big question, is the academic culture going to change to allow faculty to advance in a way that is really reflects the realities of today's world? And well, so far it hasn't, with a rare exception. And why it has this staying power, I just don't know. And there are a few institutions where this is probably not, a few departments and a few institutions where this is not the case. But I think this points to a very, very serious deficiency. On the one hand, the universities are kind of broadcasting themselves as being centers of progress and progressive thought and creative work. On the other hand, they're behaving in a way that totally contradicts that. And so that has to be changed, and I don't know how to change it. But I think the new generation will. The people who believe or who have grown up with a keyboard instead of a pen know how to do scholarship and research in new ways that will change this tilt. So, thank you very much.